Hi, I'm Nickolas Butler, and you're watching Time to Connect.
Nickolas Butler, thank you so much for joining me on Time to Connect.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, John.
I appreciate it. I'm assuming you're home in Wisconsin, is that right?
I am. Yep. I'm in our dining room right now, which is also where I get a fair amount of writing done. And it's a pretty actually a pretty warm morning here in January for us. It's been brutally cold, but we're kind of coming out of the cold snap now.
Now, of course, I'm down here in Texas, so when you say it's not too bad, what is your temperature this morning?
I think it's like upper 20s right now, but the thing was maybe a week ago we had real temperatures that were negative 22. So if you go from negative 22 to say 27, that's a 50-degree
Yeah,
temperature swing.
yeah,
27 starts to feel pretty balmy.
yeah. Yeah, I was actually in Minot, North Dakota, about 2 weeks ago, and I think when we landed it was minus 20, but then a couple days later it was up into the 20s. So I know what you mean. Now, how long have you lived in Wisconsin?
Um, I grew up here in Eau Claire.
Okay.
So I mean, I wasn't born in Wisconsin. I was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, but had in the parlance of baseball, had a cup of coffee in Pennsylvania, and then my family came here, and I was here until high school, then kind of bounced around for about 12, 15 years. But we've been in this house south of Eau Claire since 2013.
Right on.
Yeah.
And Nick, we got a lot to talk about today. I mean, the main thing I think we want to talk about is your new novel that is about to be released. I think I will release this episode, in fact, the day it is released on
Oh,
February 4th. We
thanks.
definitely want to talk about that. But I also want to talk about this because I really dig your debut novel quite a bit. Um,
Thanks.
and probably some other things will come up, but let's start with a little bio. You already sort of started, but tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Nickolas Butler. I'm 45 years old. I'm married and I have two children, a boy who's 15 and a girl who's 12. We live a little south of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in west central Wisconsin. And I've been a full-time writer since 2012, which is when I graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop and sold my first novel, Shotgun Lovesongs. Um, Yeah, we're kind of on the cusp of releasing this new book, which is called A 40-Year Kiss, which will be my sixth book. And I've just been very, very fortunate. It's been like a wonderful ride. I've always wanted to be a writer. When I was a boy, I wrote for our middle school newspaper and their high school newspaper. And in my 20s, wrote freelance nonfiction here and there and published poems when I could. But, short of being the bullpen catcher for the Milwaukee Brewers, or maybe being in the front office of the Green Bay Packers, this is always what I've wanted to do. And I don't take it for granted. Um, it's really my dream, and I work hard on it and think about my life as a craft that I'm trying to get better at, hopefully. So, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful, man. I mean, a lot of us wanted to be writers when we were young, but you're really doing it. How old has it always been with you, or was there a moment maybe in your youth where you said, I think I really can be a writer as a profession, not just as a hobby?
Well, I don't know what it was like. I don't know where you grew up or what it was like when you were growing up, but growing up here in Eau Claire, it was a very safe place to grow up. And a lot of very famous artists have come out of Eau Claire at the same time I was growing up in Eau Claire. A lot of them are my friends, actually. But none of us really had role models for becoming writers or poets or musicians. So the notion that I never would have vocalized that I wanted to be a writer. necessarily, okay? Because that's just not a Midwestern sort of thing. It's okay to be want to be a teacher or an attorney or a doctor or something useful, but vocalizing, in the late 90s, early 2000s that I wanted to be a writer, I don't, why would you want to do that? Um, Yet it was always in the back of my mind, and I think the turning point for me was when my wife became pregnant with our son Henry. Um, and I'd worked this long trail of kind of dead end jobs, and just had a conversation with myself about what kind of human I wanted to be and what kind of dad I wanted to be and husband, and determined against all odds that the only thing I was any good at was writing. And so I was going to start to put everything I had into it, which meant taking workshops and applying to grad school and working on my craft. I mean, I would work relentlessly on short stories at that time. And that was really the turning point, kind of having a conversation with myself about who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be. I gave myself a deadline too. I applied to grad schools in two years. The first year I didn't have much luck. The second year I had much more luck. But I think if I'd gotten shut out that second time I applied to grad schools, I don't know what my life would look like.
Cliche question, but if it didn't work out, if not a writer, what do you speculate you'd be doing?
Well, just before getting into grad school, I was a coffee roaster at a very high quality roastery in Madison, Wisconsin, and I love that work because um, I'm a sensual person. I don't mean that in a sexual way necessarily. I just mean to say, like, I love good wine. I love good food. I love great coffee. And I love that job. I would travel to Central America to buy coffee, and you're always thinking about the taste in the coffee and how you were going to roast that to bring out the best thing in the beans. And I love that work. So I could see being a coffee roaster. I also, as I said, I love beer. I love wine. I would have been happy, working at a brewery or owning a brewery. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing that being from the part of the country you're from and being someone who loves wine and food, you're a fan of Jim Harris.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think fan probably doesn't quite capture it. I'm more of a fanatic, I think you could say.
Yeah, I love the man for sure. I I think I like his essays more than anything, but I love his poetry. I love his novels, and he was a gem for sure. I do want to say, ask you who else maybe you read or who have influenced you. But before we get there, let me ask you how old were you when you entered the Iowa Writers Workshop?
I would have been 30. 30. Yeah.
And were you one of the older people in your cohort then, or was that pretty normal?
No, I was trending on the older side of things. My first workshop, I think maybe we had 9 people, something like that.
Okay.
And uh probably 2/3 of those people who are still my friends now they had just come from undergraduate. So very smart people, 23, 24 years old. And there was me and a woman who was roughly my age, and then another writer who was maybe in his 40s at that time. So I was definitely on the older side of our class. Yeah.
And on a different podcast, we're going to talk about James Galvin. Was he one of your professors there?
Well, I went to Iowa for fiction, so most of I never would have had him, for example, for a workshop, but I did any time I had the opportunity to take one of his classes, I did. So the first year I took a class that he taught on what's his name, James Merrill,
Uh,
and the second year I was there, he taught a class on Moby Dick. And I had
oh wow.
never read Moby Dick. I tried and failed a number of times, and I thought, if I can't get through Moby Dick with James Galvin holding my hand, then maybe I don't deserve to be here. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, hey, let's transition
Sure.
to the your new novel. It is it's a lovely book. It's tender. It's dear. It's especially for an old guy like myself. It's you tend to see a lot of yourself in a book like this. I'm kind of a sucker for this kind of sweet uh, love story, really, but it's not a typical love story. I've heard you tell the story a little bit about how you got the idea in the bar. Would you tell that story again to our listeners?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, gosh, I guess it would have been around tw 22 or 23. I can't really remember. I could look it up, but it was the fall and my kids my kids are swimmers. So sometimes they have swim practice in Eau Claire and sometimes they're up in Chippewa, which is kind of a little north of where we are. And if you're a swim parent, then you can understand like once you've watched your child swim like 100,000 or 10,000 laps or 50,000 laps or whatever, you really don't need to hang around every practice to watch them, like. So I would go to this bar called the Tomahawk Room in downtown Chippewa, which is one of my absolute favorite bars anywhere in the world. And I was sitting at the bar minding my own business, working a Sudoku puzzle, and I heard this guy, maybe in his mid 60s, maybe upper 60s, something like that, say to the woman sitting next to him, "I still dream about kissing you. May I kiss you?" And I thought, like that kind of poetry doesn't really happen in the Tomahawk Room as much as beautiful a bar as it is, that just doesn't happen. And I thought they were going to have this chaste exchange, like a polite peck on the cheek, but they really had a passionate, long kiss. Yeah, and I was blushing and trying to pretend like I wasn't eavesdropping, but then the guy continued to just say these really lovely romantic things. And that went on for a little while, and then they just got up in time and left the bar. And I thought, well, shit, I think this is what I'm supposed to write about. And at that time, I was publishing with Putnam. I had a really great editor named Sally Kim, and I knew that Sally probably wanted me to write another literary thriller like my last book, but I just um, the older I get, the more I believe in writing gods, and I think there's times where the writing gods drop something in your lap, and if you're thinking about um, writing contracts or what a publisher wants rather than thinking about what the writing gods want you to do, that's a recipe for disaster. So I just went after the story.
Well, I'm sure that if that's not what she wanted, one of the things that surely she saw right away is how well this thing might lend itself to film. And I want to ask you about what's going on screenplay wise with you. But man, this one, actually, both of these that I wanted to talk about, as I was reading Shotgun Love Songs, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I was thinking scenes from Big Chill, for example. I was thinking
Oh, yeah.
this really could work. But this one, I mean, I'm already thinking of some people who could play those lead roles. But I have a hard time explaining a novel to someone without giving it all away.
Yeah.
I assume you've got a book tour coming up with this, or you're probably already doing it. How do you talk to people about this novel without giving away the whole story? What do you say typically?
Well, I just say it's a well, first off, I've always resisted like the elevator pitch, which probably isn't a good thing. But I have a decent one for this one, and I just say it's a love story about two star-crossed lovers, 60-something lovers in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin.
There you go.
And I say it's about, small towns in the Midwest and second chances and love and romance and redemption and I think about things that we love too, one thing that this book is concerned with is the ways in which the things that we love can act as hurdles in our life, whether it's alcoholism or feeling like you like being a martyr, or you love a place so much that maybe you don't leave it and that hinders what you can do, so different kinds of love. um But yeah, who do you see when you cast it in your mind as a movie? Who I'm curious who you imagine.
Oh, now you're gonna put me on the spot. Yeah, I think I'm gonna pass on that question because
Okay.
do you see anyone?
Um, well, I mean, what was crazy is not long after we sold the book, um, I got a new film agent and he started shopping it really energetically. And we had these for a little while. We had Meryl Streep's people and Tom Hanks's people and Steven Spielberg's people all sending my agent emails. And I thought, oh my God, like
Oh, that would be incredible.
if this happens, it's gonna be pretty nuts. But I think there's people poking around it right now. I don't
Yeah,
try to not like get too attached to any one idea because I don't have any control over it ultimately.
sure, sure. That's amazing. Uh, would you read something from the novel for us?
Yeah, do you have a place that you want me to read from, or could it be anywhere, anything?
Anywhere, just what? And I'm assuming, let me put the speaker view on you. I assume that you, it's one of the things that you do in the book tours, and so maybe you've got some particular passages that you're thinking about.
Yeah. All right. So this is early in the book. Our two main characters are kind of going for a walk in downtown Chippewa. Finally, they stood in front of an old bar, the Sheely House Saloon. There were three men inside drinking, staring up into the blue of a television mounted above them. Want to go in? He asked. We could have one more for old time's sakes, a nightcap. This place is supposed to be haunted, she said, turning to smile at him. Do you believe in ghosts? I don't know, he said. Then he said, yes, I guess I do. Really, she said. Why? He looked up at the night sky. There were a few handfuls of stars, the brightest ones anyway, burning against the lights of the sleepy town, but he couldn't find the moon. I guess, he said unsteadily, that I want to believe in spirits and souls. I wouldn't have said something like that back when I was younger, when we were married, I suppose, but you start to get older, she put in. Yeah, he said, you start to lose people. First your grandparents, and then your parents, and then it's your favorite musicians and actors, athletes and writers. Then it's your friends, and you want to see those people again, or at least I do. I miss those people. I hope heaven is a long party where I never get drunk. Someone just keeps passing me flutes of cold champagne, and I go from one room to the next, seeing old friends, old relatives, but no one ever has to stop to clean the dishes. They just disappear. A waiter brings you a new, fresh, cool glass. It would be like a reunion, one of those evening parties where time doesn't matter, where it's dark as you walk into the party and dark when you walk out. I think that must be the trick of heaven.
Nice, nice. You know, it's so easy reading your novels. It's so easy to picture these people and these scenes. It just seems so natural.
Thank you.
What's the secret to that? What do
Oh,
you
geez,
think?
I don't know. Well, thank you. That's a nice thing to say. I think so I guess the way that I'm going to clumsily answer that question is that I went through like a 6 month period recently where seemingly every young ambitious writer was sending me their novel to blurb it, right? And many good books in there, and it was exciting to read them. But one thing that I realized in reading other people's work is that in my work, I want to be very much in scene all the time, very close to the characters. I try not to go into backstory a whole lot anymore. I just want to keep the action moving forward, and I want to keep my camera lens as close to the characters as possible. And um, that's probably the best answer that I can provide you. I just feel like as a writer, my camera lens is really closely trained on the characters, and I think that kind of creates a level of immediacy and intimacy, or at least that's my goal. Um, yeah.
and a lot of dialogue that just feels so real and natural. I'm assuming, probably like a lot of writers, you're a guy who does sit someplace sometimes and just listen to people around you talking, just absorb.
I love people. I mean, what a frustrating time in our country right now for a lot of ways. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too hard, but this past summer I ran for political office.
Yeah,
And so I spent, months of my summer knocking on the doors of strangers, in and around Eau Claire. And I found overall that I probably wouldn't make a very good politician, but I loved meeting people. I loved going into their house. I loved the things that they told me. I felt so privileged to receive their stories and their concerns. And, um, it's one thing that I worry about for future writers is that I feel like we're losing connections as human beings, right? It's really easy to be inside your phone or to just look at the internet. And when I think about how this book came to be, it was because I was in a bar, which is a social setting. I was listening to people, and it was the same thing with politics too. Like I think we're moving like in 10 years, I don't really know if politicians will go door to door to knock on the doors of their constituents because now we have these like ring cameras. So people see you coming and they just don't answer the door. Well, that's not actually good for their democracy, right? If a politician is submitting him or herself so much that they're coming to your door to find out what's important to you as the voter, that's a really magical, rare thing. But I worry we're losing that. Like we're rejecting human connection, which I don't think is good for art. I don't think it's good for writing. I don't think it's good for politics. I don't think it's good for us as a species.
yeah, it's not good for the human spirit. And you came really actually really close, did you? How many votes did you?
Oh, I don't.
It
I
wasn't many,
mean,
right? You were really
well,
close.
it was like, I mean, it was a state assembly race. So it's not a huge, it's more of it's a state level position. And I lost by 300 votes, but that was 3%. That was enough to do it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think was there almost a relief? You said you figured out maybe you weren't cut out to be a politician. Was there almost that sense of, well, I gave it a good try, but it's probably just as well that I didn't win.
the tricky thing about answering that question is that I think once you step into the river of politics and you start accepting people's donations and volunteer hours, that there is just no way that you can half-ass it or
Yeah.
take the process for granted. So now there's a little bit of relief potentially, that I can spend my morning talking to you, right? Rather than I don't really know how I would promote this book if I'd won. I would have had to do both, but I don't know what it would have looked like.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I wanted it. I love this area. I didn't want it. I didn't care about the office so much, but I cared about serving my friends and neighbors, and I care about the place where we live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're serving humanity in a different way. So you got this book tour coming up. What is that like? Give me a
Well,
sense of what it's like when you do these book tours.
yeah. I mean, it's an honor, of course, because I mean, it's costly for the publisher. Um, it means something to the bookstores that you're going to, right? I mean, they don't have to have a reading for you. So it's a big honor that way. And, most of my time as a writer is spent just kind of talking to myself and thinking about my imaginary friends. So there's something rewarding in going out and talking to, like you're a book person. It's thrilling for me to have an opportunity to talk to you because I spend a lot of time just by myself. And I think of tour that way. Um, it's also going to be interesting to see what it's like because I'm 45 now. I'm not 34 like when I launched Shotgun Lovesongs. And the romance of a book tour can go away pretty quickly. You're just you're just by yourself in a hotel somewhere. I mean, that's not,
So most of my guests, at least at you're going to be episode 80 something or other, and for the first 50 or 60 of those, most of them were musicians. I'm a singer-songwriter, and that's where I kind of live and connect. Uh, and one question I always ask them is, do you have any crazy road stories? I know a book tour is not exactly the same thing as a musician touring around playing clubs, but do you have any crazy book tour stories?
gosh.
It's okay if no. Another
Well,
time.
I mean, there's like, yeah, I mean, well, the very first, gosh, I mean, this is tells you, I guess, how fortunate my publishing career has been. The very first place I went to when I was promoting Shotgun Love Songs was Los Angeles. Checked into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, which is where Pretty Woman was filmed. Very beautiful hotel. I don't know that I'd ever been to Los Angeles before. Did a reading one night, packed room. That was pretty cool. The next morning, I think I had a meeting with some producers that were working on Shotgun Love Songs at that time because we were pretty close to it becoming an actual movie. And I remember going to the front desk of the hotel and saying, "Well, I'm meeting these people for brunch. How far is this away from the hotel?" And they said, like, "Oh, that's a mile away." And I said, "Can I walk it?" And they were like, "Well, nobody walks in Los Angeles, but whatever. I guess you could." So I decided to walk it, and I'm walking along a highway. There's like dust hitting me. I'm sweaty, so the dust is collecting on my face. I had a long beard at that time, even a little bit longer than yours. And I show up at this brunch place, and I think I probably looked like a homeless person. And at the time, I was pretty spoiled in terms of like what I thought like the Hollywood experience was going to be like. So you sit down with these producers, and Hollywood producers are kind of their own animal, like a different animal. Like it's just a different world. And they were talking about casting the movie, and they mentioned a famous actor's name, potentially playing Leland, one of the main characters in the book, and it was the last person I wanted to hear them say. And
Oh,
I, I just, I didn't know even how to be polite, so I just went like this. I just put my head down on the table for like 5 beats. I just literally put my head down on the table, and then I realized I was being rude and sat up, and um, that was just like kind of a weird entrance into the world of publishing and movies. But yeah, I mean, I've spoke before like 1,000 people in France. When I go to Spain and Italy to promote my books, it's a lot of younger people, which is really cool. In the U.S., most of the time, most of the people that have time to go to readings tend to be a little bit older.
well,
But
and young people, I don't want to overstate this, but a lot of young people don't read.
I think there's truth to that. Yeah. I mean, I like don't want to believe that's true, but I worry that you're probably right. But that doesn't seem like my readership in Europe is young, so it's just, oh gosh, I mean, I've got some story now that I think about it, now that I'm like thinking hard about it, I've got some crazy stories from Europe, but that'll be for maybe another
Okay.
time. I don't want to belabor it.
Okay. So what is going on with respect to film? I apologize. I don't know. Have any of your
Oh,
not well, I'm sure that they've been, I forget the term, they've been
optioned.
the optioned, yeah. What's
Yeah.
going on there?
I've never had a book be made into a film. With Shotgun Love Songs, we were really, really close. Fox Searchlight bought the rights. We had a screenplay, we had a director, like we were so close. And then the directors started rewriting the screenplay, and we just lost all of our momentum, and it faded away. Um, The Hearts of Men, it has been optioned by David E. Kelly, pretty famous Hollywood producer. Um, there's a producer who's working on Godspeed, but nothing has happened. And I have good feelings about a 40-year kiss, but until something happens, it's just,
Mhm.
it's speculation.
And also, these days there's such quality TV,
Yeah.
that we didn't have. So, this any one of your novels could probably work as sort of a serialized television thing as well. Well, I wish you luck there. That would be really cool. Uh,
Thanks.
let's talk for just a minute about this book.
Sure.
And by the way, only because I really really like this book a lot, so I wanted to bring
Thanks.
it up. And what a great debut novel. I also, by the way, I wanted to read one of the blurbs from the new book that struck me as interesting. Ash Davidson said, "When we die, we'd all be lucky to come back as a character in a Nickolas Butler novel."
Oh, wow.
Isn't it
She's
nice?
Yeah, Ash is we went to grad school together at Iowa, and if you haven't read her debut novel, you should do yourself a favor, and it's really fucking good.
Right on. So, yeah, tell people about this book. One of the interesting things that you do here is kind of a point of view that's a little different than maybe some. How do you talk about this book? How do you talk?
Yeah. Yeah, Shotgun Lovesongs was my first book. I wrote it when I was at Iowa as a student. I wrote it from a place of homesickness and longing for my family and my friends and this area where I live. Um, I It started off as a novella that I turned in to that first workshop, and the novella was the first chapter of the book. And I can't even remember whose point of view that is, if it's Leland or Henry's point of view. I can't
I
remember.
think it's Henry's.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Henry's,
Yeah, it's Henry's. Yeah,
he's a farmer and he's married and he lives, in this fictitious town called Little Wing, which is kind of based off a lot of the small towns around me. And it's this novel that's told through five different points of view, four men and one woman. They've been childhood friends since the beginning, and they're all at this point in their early 30s where, I think a lot of us can relate to this. People are either getting the last group of people are getting married, or you're getting into the first kind of first divorces that have happened. And some people are having kids and some people are struggling to have kids or asking themselves if they should have kids. And some people are have already found a level of success and some people have not. It's kind of a strange time in life. I feel like things equal out a little bit more in your 40s or 50s. It might take some people a little more time to get settled, but in your late 20s, early 30s, I think it's a different time. And I'm very proud of that book. I think the thing that the book does really well is it's very emotionally vulnerable. It's just uh the risks that it takes are on the emotional level. Um the characters love each other, but they're jealous. And it talks about ambition, which I think is something that I don't read a ton about, but yeah, I mean it's a book that's still finding a readership too, which is kind of crazy. Most books, you've been doing your podcast for a while, you can attest to this. There's many thousands or tens of thousands of great books that come out every year, and the instant they publish, they also go away, almost like they didn't exist. And that's not fair, but it's the reality of the publishing world. There's just so many books coming out. And this is a book that's been published in like 12, 13 languages. It's in its eighth printing in Spain. It's beloved in Italy. It won prizes in France. And it's still finding people here in the States. So I got lucky.
yeah. Well, I don't think it was. Well, maybe there was some luck involved, but it's a terrific novel. And at the risk of stating the obvious, one of the things that it works with is the grass is always greener kind of syndrome. You
Yeah.
know, be careful what you ask for. Your musician, as successful as he is, kind of longs for Henry's life, doesn't he? And we don't want to give too much away because I want people to read it. But Speaking of musicians, what is your connection to music? Are you a musician at all? Are you a fan of music? What's your connection to music?
I have zero musical talent myself, but I grew up in a household where the radio was always on, and where my parents encouraged me to listen to music. I always had my own stereo.
How old are you?
Um, I am 45.
So you were, when you were young, oh gosh, you were brought up on the 80s music, weren't you?
Yep, late 80s, more
Yeah.
like late 80s through the 90s would be kind of
Okay.
my wheelhouse, yeah.
Uh-huh. So
Yeah.
what are some of the bands that you listened to as a kid that really affected you?
Well, I mean, I still love it. I still love In Excess. Um,
Yeah.
you know, gosh. Here's the thing, John, is that I don't really like this term, but I suppose I'm a little bit of an old soul when it comes to music. Like,
Yeah.
even though I grew up with late 80s, 90s music, um, I was listening to Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Johnny Cash, but also jazz. I would listen to Wisconsin Public Radio late at nights on Friday or Saturdays when they had a jazz hour for, well, it was like 3 hours of jazz. And I think, listening to a DJ talking to me out of Madison and listening to this music that I otherwise really couldn't easily access, it felt like I was doing something kind of erudite and something cosmopolitan. So I've always loved jazz. I've always loved Bill Evans and John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, the kind of 50s, 50s, early 60s kind of cool jazz. Um,
Yeah.
but I love music. I mean, I have a big vinyl collection, and music drives me forward when I'm writing. Too really important for me to find an album that sort of fits the mood for what I'm trying to do inside a book. And then I will listen to one track thousands of times while I'm writing a book. In the case of A 40-Year Kiss, it happened to be Christmas Blues by Willie Nelson, which is a instrumental song.
What do you suppose that is? Why do you listen to one song over and over when you're in the middle of a novel? That's interesting.
Well, this is not my original thinking, but I read somewhere, I think it was a conversation between Dave Eggers and Nick Hornby, that the reason why we listen to one song or one album obsessively is that subconsciously we're trying to figure out why we like it so much.
Hmm.
It's not that we like it so much. It's
Mhm.
that subconsciously we're trying to understand why we like it so much.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
for me, it's a little bit of it's also on a meditative level, like listening to a Philip Glass album or something like that, where you can just kind of get lost in the circuitry of a song.
You listen to Bill Frisell at all?
Yeah, I've got quite a few Bill Frisell albums. Yeah,
I've had
Nashville. Yeah.
I had him on the podcast twice, and I went to see him 2 days ago, and
Oh,
incredible as always. I like to get up to New York at least once a year just to see jazz. That's one of the great things about jazz. You know, you can see the greatest musicians in the world in a small room still.
yes,
You know, and that's super cool. Now you mentioned Bob Dylan, and I've had sort of an obsession with Dylan since I was a kid. He had a major impact on me, uh, and of course on our whole culture, and especially now that the film is out. Have you seen the film?
I did. Yeah, my son and I went to go see it.
I'm curious, just what do you, yeah, I know it's a crazy open-ended question, but has Dylan meant to you?
Well, I think what I appreciate about somebody like that is that they gave their life to music. Like they're not. I feel like there's sometimes when I talk to aspiring writers, I think they want to be a writer without understanding that it's um, a lifetime commitment. and that it's this craft that you have to keep getting better at, and that um, they don't understand that if they enter the world of writing, they're in competition with me, and I don't like I want the best for people. I want if you care about writing that much, I'll do what I can to help you get there.
But you're
But
not
if you
fucking around.
but I'm not fucking around either,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? There's a finite amount of space on that bookshelf behind you. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I think about Dylan, I mean, that was he was obsessed with that, with being a musician and being a singer-songwriter, and I love that. Also, I mean, I remember the first time I heard Nashville Skyline and just being like, "Oh, well, this sounds to me like Wisconsin in autumn." Maybe somebody maybe somebody sitting in I don't know, the Adirondack Mountains of New York feels the same way, or somebody in San Francisco feels the same way. Like this is San Francisco in autumn. But to me, Girl from the North Country Fair, like in October or late September, that's just come on, man.
Yeah. Well, he did grow up in Minnesota.
I
Uh,
know. No.
so, so interesting. We could really go down this rabbit hole, but let's touch on it a little bit. Interesting thing, the fact that you brought up that he put his whole being into it and how important that is to you. I instantly thought of an old Townes Van Zandt line when Townes said, and it was it wasn't an interview or something. I think it was just a casual conversation with a friend. He said, I realized if I was going to do this, that I have to blow off everything else. I have to blow off happiness. I have to blow off my family. I have to blow off my friends. I have to blow off my health. And of course he was kind of a tragic figure and not much of a model. But how do you how does one do what you are implying there, where you really put everything into it and yet maintain a happy family life, which I get the sense that you have. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the way that I'm going to answer it is that when I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop, maybe the most important teacher that I had was James Allen McPherson, first black man to win the Pulitzer Prize, I believe first black man to graduate from Harvard Law, MacArthur Genius Fellow, luminous human being. Um, but he told us that the Pulitzer Prize won't visit you in the nursing home. And he was, divorced and estranged from his children for a long time. And um, I don't know how many people read James Allen McPherson anymore. So the moral of the story is I am obsessive. I do care about this thing almost more than anything, but I'm not willing to screw up my marriage. I'm not willing to alienate my kids, because the fact of the matter is you also have to hold in your head that the publishing world is whimsical, right? It's difficult. Um, and so I do the best that I can at writing, but um, I'm unwilling to sacrifice the other stuff. I really don't think it's more important than my family.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to heroicize a guy like Bob Dylan, but we don't know what regrets he has secretly. And sometimes, like, the other thing about a celebrity is that, they can't they might be unwilling to destroy the myth of themselves, right? So you just never know, like, what regrets they have. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We have plenty of examples of very successful people who are not so happy. In fact, Leland is from your novel is an example of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's kind of start winding down here with some kind of short answer questions, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course.
What are you reading right now
Uh
or lately?
Well, I just, gosh, I finished my friend Matthew Quick's book, The Good Luck of Right Now. I think that was the only novel of his that I hadn't read. And I just love his writing. I mean, he's a close friend of mine. I don't know if you've ever had him on your show, but
I've
you
not.
you should. I think you two would hit it off. And he's got a way of writing about damaged people that I don't know that I've ever encountered anywhere else. He's really warm and caring with his characters, and so I just finished that. I'm doing a blurb for a young writer who wrote about a Milwaukee Bucks season, like kind of overlapped his own life over the top of, writing about this basketball season. That was good. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, lately it was just getting out from underneath this pile of blurbs that I needed to
Sure.
attend to. I'll finally get to reading stuff that I want to read. So,
Have
yeah,
you
what are
gotten
you reading?
have you gotten to Johnny Evison's
I
new
read it.
yeah,
I read it months ago
yeah,
and I loved it. I loved it. And I'm not surprised that I loved it. I think he and I are similar sort of writers. We care about characters and we care about
yes,
plot. And
yes,
but I think one thing that I really admired about that book is that it's very, like, on a prose level, it's beautiful, but it's also very smooth and effortless. And like, the writer is not there. It's very much this, he cares about these characters in the story and he's taken himself out of things. I love the ending of the book. I just found myself really, I don't know, touched, at the ending. And
nice.
he's a cool guy too. I mean, I was fortunate to spend some time with him out in Denver not so long ago, and he's very smart and kind of crazy in
Yeah,
a in
it's
a in a fun way. But I
yeah,
love that kind of crazy energy. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, what are you listening to? What's on your playlist right now? What's maybe the last thing you listened to, or on your turntable?
Um, let's see here. Oh, I love this album. Um,
Okay.
Sandy Bull Fantasias. It's an instrumental album. Just Sandy Bull, who's kind of a virtuoso guitar banjo player, and Billy Higgins on drum. It's something that I can write to. I love that. Let's see here. You know,
Oh yeah,
Waltz for Debbie, of
it's
course. Uh,
he was the greatest, man.
Individualism of Gil Evans.
Yeah. Okay.
I love Gil Evans. So always jazz.
Okay. Now, more on the pop side, are you a fan of Father John Misty?
Uh, I don't know. I probably haven't I haven't listened to him enough.
Listen to the new record. There's a brand new
Okay.
record of his, and the fact that you kind of cut your teeth in the '80s made me think about that because
Okay.
he's very much contemporary, but there's little moments there that he probably also grew up in the '80s. Okay, let's see. One album. I know this is a horrible question, but you can only listen. I used to use the desert island kind of thing. You're on. You can only listen to one album for the rest of your life, but that's so unfair. For the next month, that turntable can only spin one album. What is it?
I always tell people Kind of Blue. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know. I don't know what else there is. Like,
It's
yeah.
hard to beat it, man. It's hard to
Yeah.
beat it. There's a reason why it's the number one selling jazz album of all time.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Any particular pet peeves? What tends to piss you off?
Pet peeves. Um, I think there's a fine line between human complaining as a way of making conversation, and complaining because you really have uh, something bad has happened to you in your life. But I really, like, these days, I just think that if you want to make art, you just have to be positive and relentlessly positive. So I try to just sideline negativity.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
And how do you deal with, I mean, you're going to have some, as a human being, you're going to have some downtime. What down as in, tough times.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? Do you lose yourself in your family? Do you have a meditation practice? Do you lose yourself in your writing? All the above? What do you do when times are tough for you?
Yeah, I like walking as an antidote. Um, I probably drink too much. That's probably a medication. I find that work is always good, right?
Yeah,
Whatever it is.
yeah,
Go make firewood, carry firewood, split firewood,
yeah.
um,
That's a
change.
that's a very Buddhist thing to say, by the way.
Well, that's true, right? I mean, just do something.
Yeah.
I watch movies that give me comfort, like a
Is there a
good,
movie? Is there a movie you watch every year?
oh God, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
I recently, I told you we have two kids, so I end up doing a lot of laundry. It's just I'm the stay-at-home parent, so that's
yeah.
one thing I can do. And I recently watched The Untouchables, which is something that I watch pretty much every year. And
Yeah.
the writing is so good and the acting is really good. I mean, Sean Connery was never really thought of as a critically acclaimed actor, but
He's
man, that was
great.
the role of a lifetime. And he you could see he was milking it for all he could.
Yeah.
And Costner's good. Andy Garcia is sneaky good in that. Robert De Niro's in it. I mean, it's just but the writing, I think, is something that I always come back to. And so there's definitely Field of Dreams, Bull Durham. I watch those movies pretty much every year.
Mhm.
Bob Uecker recently passed away, which,
I didn't realize that. Okay.
so
Yeah.
we watched Major League. My daughter and my wife and I watched Major League, which they were like, "Oh, that's where all these sayings that you have come from." And I said, "Yeah, man, I could fucking write the screenplay of Major League by memory. Are you
Yeah,
kidding
that's
me?"
great. That's great. So when I ask a musician if they have any advice for young musicians, ask a writer if they have any advice for young writers, it's such a stale question, and they always say the same thing, right? Read and
Yeah,
write. Just do it. Is
yeah.
there any, what if you, if you had a nephew or something who said, "Hey, I really want to be a writer," other than just read a lot and just write, is there any other advice you'd have for him or her?
Um, I think, oh gosh. Yeah, it's funny because those are the two bits of advice that
Sure.
I always would say. I think there's something to um moving around, getting outside. If I lived in a city, I would be moving around all the time. Like, don't spend time in your house or your apartment. The way that you get ideas, the way that recently I've been getting ideas is by interacting with the world and interacting with other people and listening very carefully. This is the advice I would give somebody. When somebody knows that you're a writer, they understand subconsciously that you care about stories. And so oftentimes what happens is that they will tell you the most important story that defines who they are as a human being. And you have the ability to pay attention or not pay attention. And if you want to be a serious writer, then when somebody starts to tell you in their way about who they are or how they got to the point where they are, or what they think is most valuable or what they love the most, you better fucking pay attention.
Excellent. Excellent answer. All right, Nick, last question. Uh, for the first 50 or so episodes of this, always ask this question going out, and I always felt slightly, I don't know, odd about asking this question, but my listeners just love it, and they love the answers. Do you think much about mortality? What happens when we die? Do you have any concepts of that, or any ideas, or how do you think of it?
Yeah, so my dad had a massive brain aneurysm when he was 49 years old, and he and my mom were in the midst of a divorce, so I became his legal guardian. and he survived the aneurysm, but he was really weakened, and he lived the last 23 years of his life in a nursing home. So I think about time always, how fragile we are as organisms, how fleeting our time on this planet is. It's something that I really I'm obsessed with. I do not think there's anything after the light goes out, but I don't think that's a reason to live your life without a mission or direction or love or goodness, because I think the way that we live past our lifetime is by the imprint that we leave on other people. And so if you're really good to people, they will remember you as long as they are around. And if you're lucky, they tell their kids about you, and then you live a little extra because of them. Um, so that's it. Just think, be good to people, be part of a community, work hard, and it'll be okay.
Beautiful answer. Well, hey, Nickolas Butler, thank you so much for doing this. I wish you all the best and good luck on this novel. I'm sure it's going to do well. I'll release this episode on February 4th, the day that it hits the stands. So good
Thank
luck
you.
with that. And I normally say to people, I hope I see you down the road, but I know I'm going to see you down the road because we're going to do another podcast for my poetry podcast. Looking forward to that.
Yep.
Appreciate you doing this. Take care, my friend.
All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.